Welcome to Dementia Unravelled. I'm Lyndal Harris, a dementia doula, sharing information about dementia and brain health to help us better understand it. You're at Sunday lunch with your mum and she asks you the same question for the third time in about 10 minutes. Or your uncle, who's driven the same route for 30 years, gets lost on his way home and you think, is that just getting older? Or is something else going on? That question is exactly what we're talking about today. One of the most common things I hear from adult children, especially in that sandwich generation where we're caring for our own families while watching our parents age, is that they noticed something was off a long time before anyone gave it a name or a diagnosis. They just didn't know what they were looking at. So first, let me give you a little reassurance, because some forgetfulness as we age is completely normal. And so occasionally losing your keys or forgetting why you've walked into that room or forgetting the name of someone you met at a party, that's not a reason to panic, because that is not dementia. That's just a sign that we're getting a little bit older. And well, I definitely have those sorts of things all the time. The question isn't really about whether it happens, because it is going to happen, but someone with normal aging can usually retrace their steps or remember it later or laugh it off. But when that ability starts to disappear, when we can't recover or retrace and we can't find our way back, that's where we really need to pay attention to it. So what does it actually look like? Because I want to walk you through some steps of some things that families actually notice, and I want you to think about whether any of it sounds familiar. Because sometimes when we're caught up in the busyness of life, we might clock something, but then we don't really think about it. The one most people will actually see is memory. But it's not about forgetting things occasionally. It's asking the same question repeatedly, or having that same conversation you had 10 minutes ago, or forgetting something that was just discussed, because that is different from normal forgetfulness. Then there's difficulty with familiar tasks. So we're not talking about when they're trying something new. We're talking about when someone is struggling with something that they've done thousands of times. So whether that's cooking their favourite recipe for the last 20 years, whether that's keeping track of their bills, or remembering how to play a board game, which they have played for years and years. When those familiar things become confusing, that's when it's worth noting. Getting lost or disorientated is another one. It's not just about forgetting what day it is, but it's losing track of time in a bigger way. So what month is it? What year is it? But it's also getting confused about where they are. So it might be getting lost on a drive that they've done hundreds of times. Changes in how they communicate can also show up. So if they're stopping mid-sentence with no idea how to continue, or they're struggling to find words that they've always known. So a good example for that one is if someone calls a watch a hand clock. It's not that they've made a mistake, but they've literally forgotten the word watch. It's an attempt to describe it because they couldn't remember the name of it. And here's one that surprises families the most, because so many people are mindful of memory change that they don't recognize this, or they don't necessarily think of this. Mood and personality changes. If someone is becoming uncharacteristically irritable or anxious or withdrawn, you really need to take note of that. If one of your loved ones is losing interest in something they always love to do, if they were someone who was always warm and gentle and they're suddenly becoming sharp and short-tempered, or someone who was really social is starting to pull away, families can often put this down to stress, or they're just having a bad day, or they're having a bad patch, or they're getting older, or they're grumpy, but it can actually be one of the earliest signs, and it's one of the most commonly missed. Another one is poor judgment. So it might be making financial decisions that don't make any sense, being taken in by scams or cold calls in a way that's really out of character for them, or wearing completely the wrong clothing for the weather. That's another thing. They might put on jumpers in the middle of summer. These kind of lapses in judgment can be so easy to dismiss or explain away. Misplacing things in unusual ways. And I'm not talking about leaving your glasses on your head and not knowing where they are, because that's something I do all the time. But putting a TV remote in the fridge, for example, or putting the milk in the cupboard and then not realizing that they've done it. I know from personal experience, I noticed a friend of mine's mother who was emptying the dishwasher and wanted to put the clean, empty Tupperware containers into the fridge. And for me, that was one of those little clues or one of those little things that happen that you need to take note of. And when we're talking about misplacing things in unusual ways, sometimes as the disease progresses, your loved one might start accusing people of moving things or stealing things. Withdrawal, pulling back from hobbies or social activities or things that they've always loved to do. And often, and this is really important, it's not because they don't want to be there. It's because they're struggling and they can't articulate why, and they don't necessarily feel that they're on the same level and they can contribute how they used to. So they avoid it instead. Those are some of the things to look out for, or some of those early signs that you might notice. But here's something really important that I should say, is not everything that looks like dementia is dementia. We don't have to go into a complete panic if we do notice some of these things happening, but it's the time to start getting curious and just making a note of it and just seeing how often it happens. Because there are plenty of other conditions that can cause very similar symptoms, and some of them are reversible. Things like a vitamin B12 deficiency, an underactive thyroid, certain infections and depression can all look like early dementia. And depression in adults is a really key one because that in itself can affect memory, concentration, motivation, and all of those things. So it's really hard to distinguish that from cognitive decline. Certain medications might do it as well, especially if someone's taking multiple medications, which a lot of people do as they get older. The combination can cause confusion and cognitive change, and it has absolutely nothing to do with dementia. And this is why going to your GP and having these conversations really matter, because you're not assuming the worst. You actually genuinely don't know what it is, and it's worth having these conversations to find out if it's something that's fixable. There's something worth knowing about who notices it first. So small changes can be really hard to spot in yourself, and it's not denial, it's actually biology. Your brain is what you think with. So if it's changing, so is the way you think about everything, including the changes themselves, which is why it's often people around someone who notices it first. And here's something that comes up a lot. The cousin or the sibling who only visit once or twice a year and quietly pulls you aside afterwards and says, "Has mum always been like this?" Or, "I've noticed this, I've noticed these changes." The people who live with someone day to day can adapt gradually to these small changes and they stop seeing them. And so a person walks in with fresh eyes and they can often see what's been building for months. And so if that's you, if you're the one that's noticing something on a visit, trust that instinct and say something, but say it in a really gentle and loving way. And on the flip side of that, if you're in that daily living situation and someone else raises it with you, try not to be defensive because it's often coming from a place of love. When it comes to actually having the conversation, I know it can feel terrifying. And I know because I have done this on numerous occasions with my loved ones. And it's really tricky because you love them and you don't want to hurt them, but you also know that it's the right thing to do. So if you're working yourself up to it, here's how I'd approach it. It's making sure they know that you are coming from a place of love and not alarm. So you could say something like, "I've noticed a couple of things lately and I just wanted to make sure you're okay." So you're framing it in a way that's ruling things out rather than assuming the worst. You don't want to start saying, "Oh, I've noticed that your memory's not so good and, I think there's something wrong and we need to go to the doctor," because that just puts fear and panic and it takes their confidence away. And then you can offer to go with them to the GP, not just suggest that they go. Offer to be there with them and be that support. Because here's the important part too. The sooner you know, the more you can do. And if it turns out to be something else entirely, something that's treatable and your doctor can get on top of it early, that's amazing. And if it is dementia, an early diagnosis means that you have more time to plan, you can get more access to support, and more importantly, you have the ability for your loved one to get involved in decisions about their own care while they still can. And also, the research shows that some of the interventions and the medications work better the earlier you start on them. So there are a few signs to look out for. There's a couple of pointers on what you can do if you do see those, because this is the type of thing that, again, I've been through with a couple of different family members and with other people as well. And it can be really difficult and it can feel really hard. But if you are noticing the signs, don't ignore them. It's better to get on top of them and have loving conversations and show that you're there for support than it is to wait for 2 or 3 years and really notice a decline. And I talk to people all the time who find the conversations really difficult to have, and they might be second guessing themselves and not wanting to cause offense or alarm to their loved one. And so they just don't have the conversation. And really, the not knowing is often the hardest part. So as soon as you get onto it, get informed, know what's happening, even if it is scary. It's better to work together in a really loving and supporting way. If something in today's episode resonated, if you've quietly been watching a parent or a loved one and just wondering, trust that instinct. You just have to calmly take the next step, which starts with a conversation with your GP, or if you feel more comfortable, you can ring the National Dementia Helpline, which is 24/7, it's free and it's confidential. And the number for that is 1-800-100-500. And if you know someone who's been asking themselves, is this normal? Please share this episode, because sometimes just having words for what you're seeing makes all the difference. Next episode, I'm introducing you to an evidence-based program that's been shown to help slow cognitive decline, improve mood, and reduce social isolation. It's called cognitive stimulation therapy, or CST, and it's something I am really passionate about. And I've teamed up with another dementia doula, and we are running sessions here in Brisbane as well as virtually. So if you're curious about ways to actively support the brain for someone with mild to moderate dementia, that's what we're talking about next week. Thanks for listening to Dementia Unravelled. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow the podcast and share it with someone who might find it helpful. Links to my website and socials and any resources mentioned can be found in the show notes. This podcast is for educational purposes only and isn't a substitute for professional medical advice.